Unions are making the case for the minimum wage to rise by more than 7% to keep up with inflation. Let's go live to Trudy McIntosh. Trudy, this is the usual claim put forward initially. What's the reaction so far?
And the usual response, Tom, from business that if we see this sort of minimum wage hike above inflation, which the headline rate in December quarter was 7.8%, that we will see job losses. Both sides will make their case before the Fair Work Commission. The first submissions will be due in by the end of this month. We will get a greater indication of where inflation has gone before the Fair Work Commission actually has to hand down its ruling here. But interesting intervention this morning on the front page of The Australian. 6 unions banding together, all making the case that workers should not be getting a wage increase that is less than where inflation is at the moment. We can show you the unions that have backed this call, and some more stridently than others. The comment from the CFMEU that anything else would be a cruel blow, that wages must keep up with inflation. The Australian Manufacturing Workers Union says at the bare minimum, it must beat inflation. Last year during the election campaign, Anthony Albanese was pressed on what Labor would do in terms of its submission. Ultimately, it landed on saying that workers should not go backwards, but in reality, that means the government made the case for it to at least match inflation, and that's what we did see last year. Will that be the case this time around? Well, the Finance Minister wouldn't be drawn on that.
I think particularly for low-income workers, we want to make sure that, they are getting sustainable and affordable pay rises. We didn't put a figure on it last year. I don't expect we will put a figure on it this year.
No, but you did talk about not going backwards. Do you think it should keep up with inflation for these lowest paid workers?
We don't. We want to see low-income workers get a good pay rise. You'll see our submission.
Of course, we've got Katie Gallagher in the Senate this week watching on as Labor tries to resolve some of these Senate standoffs, Trudy.
The first fight, Tom, today has been around the voice machinery referendum changes. This is the rules of the game which will govern the vote later this year on the Indigenous Voice to Parliament proposal. Now, the government has not agreed to the coalition demand to provide equal funding to the yes and no campaign, and so this comes down to how many of the crossbench are willing to back this. The key will be whether the Greens in fact support this. They've made their position clear in terms of amendments. They would like to see improvements in terms of allowing more people in remote Indigenous communities to vote on the day. They've not said, though, what's going to happen if those amendments fail. They will still need the government at least 2 other Senate crossbenchers, but it appears that task will be much easier. Key Senate crossbenchers this morning are largely indicating they will support this.
It is providing much needed updates to how referendums are conducted.
I rise to speak in support of this bill, although I will be moving a number of amendments.
So we don't have too much problem with that. We're pretty happy with that.
It's absolutely vital that we take the time in this place to get this process right.
There's still some way to go on that, likely to see a vote on that tomorrow rather than today. I'll show you some of the other crucial pieces of legislation that remain stalled as we wait for the numbers in the Senate. The National Reconstruction Fund, well, the Greens have said they will back that, so that's likely to get through later this week. The $10 billion Housing Future Fund, still an impasse between Labor and the Greens there, and the same can be said for the safeguard mechanism, Labor's key climate emissions reduction policy. The Greens were initially saying they wanted no new coal and gas. The government won't budge on that. We still wait and see whether that will, in fact, get a deal by this time next week, Tom.